Let's explore Nik HDR Efex. HDR stands for High Dynamic Range. Sometimes when you're taking a photo, you'll be presented with a scene that has more information than your camera can capture, because from the darkest to the brightest area is beyond the capabilities of our camera's sensor. So we'll have a sky that's overexposed or some shadows that are underexposed. But by using HDR Efex, we can take multiple exposures and compress those values and get a really amazing high dynamic range image. And we can do that in two ways. You can do tone mapping with a single image. That's what we're going to start with. That's when you have an image that has a lot of different values that need to be compressed. If you have a camera that has the ability to capture all those things, well, this software is perfect for working with those images. But the most common use is to take several images that you've shot using bracketing. In other words, you take your camera and put it on a tripod, you shoot an image that is correctly exposed, an image that is underexposed by maybe half a stop or one stop, and then another one that's overexposed by a stop, and you take all of those different exposures, combine them, and make an image. So we're going to start with tone mapping. So we're going to do this by hopping into Nik HDR Efex. So I'm going to go over to the Nik 6 collection, and then I'm going to open Nik 6 HDR Efex immediately as a standalone application. So when I'm in this application, the first thing I need to do is drag a photo in the middle. So we can do this again in two different ways: tone mapping for a single image, or HDR merging with several images. We are going to start with the single image. So we're going to go into our workshop folder. There's an image here called Nepal Valley, and it is an image with a lot of dynamic range. But when I open that, so I'm just going to preview that by hitting the space bar, we can see that it looks like nothing. We have a big black area at the bottom and then sort of this angelic sky at the top, but there's no detail there because the dynamic range of the image is too great for us to show. We need to compress the bottom area, make that an exposure that is understandable to see what's there, and then take the sky and make sure it's balanced. We need to balance all of these values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this into Nik HDR Efex, and you'll see something amazing right off the bat. Bam! Hey, there's a foreground. As soon as you open an image in HDR Efex, it's already doing the work for you. And so this is sort of amazing. Let me show you how this is happening. We're going to come over here to these presets on the left in a second. I want to first show you on the right-hand side something amazing. So we have this HDR method. So by default, as soon as you load the image in, it is doing the high dynamic range compression immediately. That's why we're seeing the foreground and the background and everything is popping out, and it looks nothing like the image that we showed that was on the hard drive. It's using this HDR compression. We have three options here. Normal, which is what we're seeing. We can go to strong, we can go to off, and we can go to subtle. So it changes a little bit of how the software is compressing the highlights and the shadows and the darks and all of those things. We also have the detail can be realistic. We can go more accentuated, detailed, grungy, or very, very soft. And then we have drama. So we have flat drama, natural, deep, dingy, sharp, grainy. So those three things are the engine of the HDR conversion. So by playing with those three sliders, you can change the look of your image. I'm going to leave this at the default for the rest of this tutorial because I like a more realistic look. So we're going to keep everything realistic so that it looks more like the Nepal Valley that I saw with my eyes. We also have some other things here: tone compression and method strength. So before we get there, let's go back over here to these presets. So by default, it's just creating an HDR image that we can work with the sliders on the right. But we also have presets that have been created by DxO to get us closer to where we want to be. So you can click on these and see how it affects your image. So we've got things like bright. When I click on that, blammo, this is very bright, or dark. And so depending on what you click, it's going to change the parameters on the right. So that is how that works. That looks sort of, ooh, that looks pretty good. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go from our default and work forward, and I'm gonna show you how each of these sliders works and how it affects this image, and it's really sort of an exciting thing. So we're just working with one image. So the first thing I want to do is I wanna start at a nice place. And so instead of having to go in and experiment with things, I'm going to go through these presets and figure out something that gets me as close as possible to my finished result. I've done that before. I think balanced is a good place for us to start. We're at a nice balanced exposure. So we need to go in and change some of the tonality of this, the sharpening and the finishing touches. So let's do that. So the first thing I want to do is take this exposure. It looks about right. Our shadows look about right. Our highlights though, well, I think they're too much. So what I can do here is I can take those and bring them down. So a little bit, I want a little bit more of the sky. And the nice thing about this, again, is we're gonna work our way through it. If we need to make changes, we'll go to the top, we'll keep going. We'll do that over and over until we get the exact image that we want. So our highlights, I think that's going to be a good place for us to start. The contrast, I need more than that. So this preset didn't get me where I wanted to go. So I'm going to come back to, I don't know, about neutral, 2%, that's pretty good. And then our blacks are at 100%. In other words, we brought the values up so they're brighter. I'm going to bring those down so we have a little bit more contrast. Just taking a look at what we're seeing in the middle here. Again, I can go before and after. We're seeing that we're getting to the place that I want to be. The whites in the sky, that's too gray. Let's bring that up to about 50, 60%, something like that. Okay, now our clouds are starting to look good. And then the other thing that we need is a little more structure, a little more punch. So something 10 or 15%. Look at that. That looks pretty cool. Okay, so once we've done that, we can change our color temperature. We can bring that, make it warmer, make it cooler, do all kinds of things. So I'll maybe bring that up. Well, I think I'm going to leave that at 0 for now. I don't want to overdo it. But what I want to show you, we have some selective adjustments. We are going to work on those in the next tutorial when we merge several images. But now I want to show you this panel right here, this finishing panel, because it has a lot of hidden power. By default, these are hidden, so you only see something like this, maybe something like this. You might not even notice it's down there, but don't pass this up because it can radically change your image. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool, the Graduated Neutral Density Filter. So you might be thinking, let's use a control line or a control point to affect this sky, but HDR Efex has a Graduated Neutral Density Filter built in. So if you're not familiar with one of these filters, they generally are a physical filter that you put on your lens for dealing with scenic photos where you have a bright sky and a dark foreground. And so it will gradually go from a dark filter and it will fade into just a no filter at all. So it's like putting sunglasses on part of your image so that the sky is exposed the same as the foreground. That's built in to HDR Efex. So what we can do is we can turn that on, then we can change how far down or how high up that darkening is. We can also change the orientation of that to match the sky. So it's got a lot of amazing ability here. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take this upper tonality and let's take that. It looks pretty good. I don't think we need to do anything to the sky. What we need to do is take this lower tonality to about 2, something like that. Our blend to about 43%. And then let's do this. So what we can do is we can see what's happening. You see I'm affecting the sky. If I take my vertical shift, I can make that go up. I can make it go down. So what we're going to do here is we're going to play with this until we get a balance of the sky and the foreground that looks about right. I think about right there. It's just a really finite adjustment. So it's -0.2 and 0.4. It's all we really need to get that balance to be exactly where we want it to be. The vertical shift looks pretty good. Let's rotate this around a little bit. To see what you're doing, you might have to take this and really darken it so that as you're rotating, you can see what's happening. So about right there is good. going to take this back to where I had it before. That looks pretty good. Always go into your compare and click before and after to see the progress that you're making. We can see that we have some really dramatic effects. The other thing that's sort of hidden down here are our levels and curves. So we can go into this and we can start adjusting that to bring our values exactly to the place that we want them to be. So I want this to be, about like that. It's pretty good. Playing with the sky. That looks pretty amazing, just as it is. Again, before and after, before and after. If I don't like the exposure or something like that, I can always go up to the top and play with that stuff. I think this looks pretty darn good. Let's do a before and after with this wipe. A little squeegee there. How amazing is that? So again, let's take a look at the real before, which was this. Just a really dark image with some beams coming out of the sky, to what we got, which is this. It's amazing. So that is single image tone mapping, and it works great for images like this where you really want to bring out the max. What we're going to do next is we're going to combine 3 images into one. So this, I need to explain that this was shot handheld. So if you do an HDR image bracketing where we shoot exposed correctly, underexposed, and overexposed, and you do that intentionally to put together later, generally you put your camera on a tripod so everything lines up and you don't have any issues. I didn't do that. The next images I shot, I was just holding them with my hand, so they're not lined up exactly right, so it has some issues that we need to fix. So let's learn how to fix that. So what I'm going to do here is let's go back over into our HDR Efex, and we have a folder called Louvre. We have 3 images. So if I preview those, we have an underexposed image. So the Louvre is underexposed, but the sky has detail. The next image we have is the same place, but this is exposed correctly. So the sky has even more detail. We've got a little bit more of the pyramid, but the building is still underexposed. And then the next image that we see, the building is exposed, but the sky is overexposed. We need to combine all 3 of those to get an image that we like. So let me grab these and drag them. And the first thing you're going to see is that we have this new interface. This is for merging those 3 files. So we have to tell HDR Efex how to merge the files. It's a 2-step process. The first thing we do is we merge the files. After we merge the files, we do what we just did. We do all of our tone mapping and get our exposure set correctly. So the first window, we're just merging things and making sure we do that in an intelligent way to fix some of the issues like not using a tripod. So let's go in here and you'll see some options. It's a pretty simple window. And when we look at this, you're thinking this does not look good. It's okay. It usually isn't going to look good because we haven't done any tone mapping yet. So we have on the bottom here 3 images, those 3 images I dragged in. HDR Efex knows that the middle image was exposed correctly, so 0 exposure value. In other words, no compensation was applied. It's a good exposure. -1, so it's underexposed by 1 stop. And then 1, so +1 EV. So we know we have -, 0, and 1, those 3 images. You can do 5 images if you want, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2, or third stops, whatever you want to do when you're bracketing your images. Nik HDR Efex is going to be smart enough to know which images are which and place them in the right order. On the right-hand side, we have this loop that we're going to be using to make sure that we get our merge all set correctly, because we have some issues. There are some people walking in this image right in this area, and then there's a person down here and a little kid down there. So what I want to show you, we're going to go back over here to the Finder so you can see these exactly right. When I open this image, so I've got these 2 images back to back, take a look at these people right here. They're walking, so they're not in the same place from image to image. And this lady and this kid down here, they're moving. So what they're going to create when we merge the images, they're going to create ghosts. So when we put those 2 images together, they're not going to align correctly. They're going to have sort of a ghosting effect. We have to fix that. The other thing that's happened is because I moved my hands, the images aren't going to align exactly. We have to fix that as well. We have two buttons right here. So we have a check mark for image alignment. If I just click on that, it's going to fix aligning the issues and the tripod problem just by clicking that. Ghost reduction is a little bit more complicated. By default, you can just click that and it's going to work just fine. But I'm going to take this pen, I'm going to put it on this guy, and you can see that it's just a single person, a single pair of legs. But if I increase the strength of that just a bit, you can see a ghost there. So you see two of the guys from two different photos. So the key here is to have the strength high enough that you only have one thing and not low enough that you have more than one, or too high that it overcompensates, and again they start to show up. So we just want to play with this until we see just one of whatever object that was moving, and that's why we have this loop. So we can look through the image, we can look at the kid in the lower right hand corner, see if there's any ghosts, or on the edge of the person's head and where people are standing, things like that. We can look and see if there's any issue. There's not. Also, chromatic aberration. Sometimes if you have a lens that's not so fancy, you'll have some magenta lines around the edges of objects. If you have that in your image, it sort of will show up and you'll see it there. You can click that. That's going to remove that chromatic aberration. We don't have any of that in this image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now merge these so I can start doing my tone mapping. Once I click that, it's going to open in HDR Efex, and now we have an image that looks radically different than we did in the merging stage. So don't get hung up on how the image looks in the merging stage. It's going to be different as soon as it hops into the app. Okay, so what we need to do here is start working with this and make this an image that is more pleasing. Now in my mind, I know I want this to be a really golden, amazing sunset photo that I'm going to crop to make a nice panorama. So that's what I have in my mind as I'm moving forward. The first thing I want to do is to check to see if the HDR method is what I want, and it absolutely is. These are the defaults. Play with these to see sort of the effect it has on your image. The other thing I need to do is play with the tone compression. So by moving this forward, or moving it left, moving it right, what's happening is we are telling HDR Efex how to smoosh the image from the darkest to the brightest areas. How much compression do we want? I generally leave that slider alone until I've played with my tonality sliders first, and then I'll come back to it. I'll go back and forth between those. So the first thing I'm going to do is nothing to this tone compression. We'll come back to it and see if we need it as we go forward. So the first thing I want to do is take my exposure down. This is just way too bright. So I'll take that down by about half, so about 50%. Already it's starting to look much better in the sky. The shadows, I want to open those up. So the building here, so I'm going to go to about 40–45%. We're starting to get there. Let's compare before and after. Pretty cool. Our highlights, we need a little bit more of those clouds up there. Not too much. We need more contrast. So the difference between the darkest and brightest areas in the image, let's magnify that just a bit. And then our whites, let's bring those whites up to about 30–35%. So we're getting there. It's getting closer. I think now it's time to play with the tone compression. So now let's start moving that to the right just a bit. And okay, about there is good. Now I know based on experience that something's going to happen when I change my saturation. So watch what happens when I increase my saturation to, I don't know, about 14 or 15%. I'm going to make this more golden. So that makes everything brighter. So I've done this a few times, and so that's why the exposure was a little dark, because I knew when I'd get to my color, things would start brightening up. But I still have issues. I still have clouds that have dark areas in them. The sky is sort of washed out. It doesn't have much color. We need to keep doing some more things. So the next thing I want to do here, I want to go down to my levels and curves. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to bring up, yeah, there we go. That's looked pretty good. I'm bringing up my midtones. So the levels and curves are a really powerful tool that are down there that you can really start playing with things. Before, after, it's pretty crazy from where we started. So what we need to do is now we need to start making local adjustments. We need to pinpoint things that are not quite right. So the sky is not very saturated. That doesn't look very good. And the clouds have these dark areas in them. They look sort of wonky. So let's start by hopping over here. And the first thing we're going to do is add a control line. So I'm going to add a control line right here. And what I want to do is make that a little bit above the building there. Something like that is going to be good. So we're saying everything above this line, we're going to affect that and we're going to fade it out between these lines. But I don't want everything. I want just the sky. So I'm going to bring this over to the sky to get these blues. I'm going to rename this sky. And then let's see what we're getting. I'm going to turn on my mask. Okay, too much. We're getting too much. We're getting the buildings and everything. So what I need to do is I need to start playing with my luminance and chrominance sliders. So let's bring the chrominance up to say, hey, just the blues. So something like that. Now we're seeing that. Let's try playing with the luminance. Okay, now we're getting there. Now we're seeing just the sky. I can move this around just a little bit. So we're not going to be playing with the building. It's the sky that we're working with. Okay, I like that. That's a good selection. And now what I want to do with that is I want to first take the exposure up just a little bit. It was too dark, so about 30%, about that. And then let's take the color temperature, because we don't have much blue there. Taking that color temperature down just a bit, so about 50%, 40%, something like that. I'm just adding a little blue to make that sky more believable. And then it might be a little off as far as the tint goes. I'll repair that. Okay, I like that. Let's look at before and after, just the sky. Yeah, we're just adding a little bit of blue into the sky there. Our overall picture looks pretty good. The other issue that we have, these clouds look funky because they're too dark. We need to fix that. We've got this sun beaming light in, but then the underside of the clouds don't look great. I'm going to use a control point. So I'm going to click on the cloud itself, and I'm going to make this a huge control point. So it's up to, I don't know, almost 90% of its size. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the exposure, take that down a little bit. We'll take it up a little bit. Yeah, actually taking it up. That looks pretty good. Let's see what we're getting with that cloud. Oh, we got too much. We got too much. So let me start playing with the luminance. There we go. We're just getting the dark parts of the clouds, the chrominance. Exactly. That's why we have these little masks, to see what we're getting. And that looks pretty good. Our exposure looks pretty good. We'll take our whites up a little bit. Nah, that's too much. Whoa, accidentally went too far with that. Okay, now we can look to see what we're getting with the clouds. That makes it look like the sun is coming through those. I'll rename this to clouds. All right, so now we have our before and after image. I really like that. So I'm going to save this. So I'm going to File, Save Image As, and then I'm going to make sure I save this in the right place. So I'm going to have a working folder. So I'm going to save this in there as Louvre. Looks pretty good. It's a TIFF file, 16-bit. Okay, that is saved. I've saved that because there's one other thing that I want to do. In my mind's eye, I see this as a panorama. Right now it's sort of a square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over into Photoshop, and I'm going to go to that working folder. So there's the image that I just saved. I'm going to bring it into Photoshop. You could bring it into Photolab, whatever image editing tool that you use. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to get my crop tool. I know I want a 16:9, and then I'm going to crop out those people there. Bring this over, oh, something like that. About like that is good. So we've got a nice panorama. Got to bring out, I don't want that pole in the bottom. There we go. I like that. So now we have our wide angle view. So what we can do is we can knock out those, take a look at that, and we have an amazing HDR image that we got from 3 combined images. HDR Efex is great for tone mapping a single image or combining multiple images into a single HDR image. It's a tool that I use for all my HDR work, and I think you will too. Okay, I love this. Let's keep going and explore more Nik apps.